What happens when an entitled HOA Karen thinks she owns your mailbox? Well, in this story, she learned that tampering with someone else's mail can have shocking consequences. Literally. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more wild HOA and Karen stories. It all began when I moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood on the edge of town. It was one of those communities where everything looked perfect: trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, and neighbors who smiled on the surface but gossiped behind hedges. My house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, and I loved the peace it brought. At least, I did until I met the head of the HOA, Karen. Karen was the kind of woman who treated the HOA like her personal kingdom. She'd walk around with a clipboard, measuring lawns, inspecting trash bins, and leaving fines on doors for the smallest things. But her obsession with control didn't stop there. She wanted to know everything happening in the neighborhood, and when she couldn't, she found ways to snoop. At first, it was small things. My trash bin would mysteriously go missing and then reappear. My packages arrived torn open, but I brushed it off as coincidence until my mail started disappearing. Important letters, utility bills, and even a replacement debit card vanished before I could collect them. I reported it to the post office, but they said the issue seemed isolated to my box. That's when I decided to check the neighborhood security cameras. What I saw made my jaw drop. Karen, middle of the afternoon, marching right up to my mailbox, pulling out my mail like it was hers, and strolling off as if nothing happened. She even looked around to see if anyone was watching. She wasn't stealing junk mail. She was taking personal correspondence. I confronted her at the next HOA meeting, but she played innocent, claiming it was routine inspection. Apparently, she thought she had the right to check for violations in everyone's mail, a ridiculous excuse even by HOA standards. The other members looked uncomfortable but stayed silent. That's when I realized I couldn't rely on anyone else to stop her. So I decided to handle it my way. I spent the next few days researching the legality of mailbox tampering and the use of deterrents. Obviously, I couldn't harm anyone, but I could make it inconvenient. So I came up with a plan. I installed a low-voltage electric circuit inside the mailbox. It wasn't enough to cause real harm, just enough to give a surprising jolt. It was powered by a small battery pack hidden behind the post and activated by a motion sensor that turned on when the mailbox door was opened. The next morning, I set up my security cameras and waited. Hours passed. The mail carrier came, delivered letters, and left without issue. Later that afternoon, as expected, Karen strutted across the street, pretending to inspect the sidewalks. She glanced around, then reached for my mailbox handle. The second her hand made contact, her entire body jolted. She yelped, shaking her hand and stumbling back. Her clipboard went flying. She looked around, furious and humiliated, before storming off. That moment was satisfying, but I didn't realize how big the fallout would become. An hour later, she called the police. They arrived at my door, claiming there had been a report of booby traps and assault. I calmly showed them the security footage, clear evidence of her stealing my mail multiple times and the harmless setup inside the mailbox. The officer couldn't help but smirk as he watched Karen's dramatic reaction on camera. He explained that since she had been tampering with my mail, a federal offense, and since my deterrent wasn't dangerous, I hadn't broken any laws. Karen, however, was in serious trouble. When the officers went to speak with her, she tried to spin a story about neighborhood safety inspections, but that excuse didn't hold up. The postal inspector got involved and things escalated quickly. Stealing mail isn't just petty, it's a crime that carries serious penalties. A week later, word spread through the neighborhood. Karen had been removed from her HOA position pending investigation. Her smug confidence vanished overnight. People who once feared her now whispered about her downfall. The HOA tried to downplay the incident, but everyone knew. It didn't end there. 2 weeks later, she received official notice from the U.S. Postal Service that she was under investigation for mail theft. Her husband stopped showing up at HOA meetings, and her once perfect lawn started overgrowing. It was poetic justice in real time. Eventually, she was fined and forced to resign permanently from the HOA board. Her reputation was ruined, and for the first time, the neighborhood felt peaceful again. People began walking their dogs without looking over their shoulders. Mail arrived safely. Packages stayed where they belonged. One afternoon, as I checked my mail, I noticed something different. Neighbors actually waved. One even joked that I should patent my anti-Karen mailbox. The once uptight community finally seemed relaxed. Months later, a new HOA president took over, someone reasonable and fair. They even sent me a thank you letter for helping restore trust in the neighborhood. I never mentioned how I did it, but the look on their face when they passed my mailbox told me they'd heard the story. As for Karen, she eventually moved out. Rumor had it she tried joining another HOA community nearby, but was rejected after someone looked up her record. It turns out that being the neighborhood control freak doesn't pair well with having a criminal record for mail theft. Sometimes karma doesn't need a grand gesture. It just needs a low-voltage reminder that not everything belongs to you.